That shit is fucking trash, dog. Get the fuck off the airway.
Hey, it's me back with another Retro Redux, and today we're dipping our toesies back into the MCU pool. We're talking about Incredible Hulk. Now, I generally just don't like how simple the Hulk's presentation has been in any of his movie appearances. A lot of people like to point at this movie or Ang Lee's Hulk as better portrayals of the Hulk than the rest of the MCU, specifically starting with Mark Ruffalo's performance as Bruce Banner. But in my opinion, I don't think any of them really do the character enough justice. There's so many avenues and ways you could display the Hulk story in interesting ways visually. Unfortunately, I don't think any of his solo films have any sort of true originality or creativity in its presentation or its storytelling, thus giving you a pile of bleh. Unlike the original Hulk film, this film definitely has much more of a focus tone-wise. It is definitely following in the footsteps of Iron Man with a much more grounded presentation of this character and the universe that he's set in, as opposed to Ang Lee being a little bit more out there, a little bit more campy, more in the vein of the Raimi universe or the Tim Story Fantastic Four films. To be honest with you, Hulk's only been portrayed positively in this universe and in film in general when it's like crowd-pleasing moments or the slight moments of Hulk having introspection. And I gotta be honest, rewatching all of the MCU movies has really helped with my nostalgia goggles, both in a positive and negative way. Positive is this film is not as bad as I remembered, nor ranked originally, but it's still really not that good. And the negative is it reveals that the weaknesses that also plague the current MCU have always been there. Phase 1 gets a lot of grace from fans when it comes to the retroactive praise of the better days of the MCU, but to be honest with you, the better days of the MCU, as someone who watched all of the MCU films, didn't really come until Phase 3. Phase 1 and 2 had their highs, don't get me wrong. The first Iron Man, the first Avengers, the first Guardians, Winter Soldier, and I think the rest are up for debate when it comes to how mid or bad they are. But this idea that, Phase 4 and 5 were such an amazing dip in quality compared to Phase 1, 2, and 3, whereas I more so feel like Phase 3 is just really a combination of great conclusions to storylines that were started in Phase 1 and 2, or great introductions to new characters that were either, super successful at the box office, super successful critically, or both. Here, the team is still in the proving grounds area, and you could tell the budget for this is just not utilized well at all. Before we get into the nitty gritty, let's just talk about the story. Bruce Banner is on the run from the government after having what seems to be a seemingly successful reaction to an experimental super soldier serum, and thusly he is being chased by Indiana Jones. I mean Thunderbolt Ross. With help from Special Agent Emil Blonsky, Ross plans on capturing Banner for revenge for not only leaving the experimental site in disarray and apparently killing some people, but also leaving with the serum that he helped Bruce Banner develop. Now, when it comes to the characters, we obviously got the main one, Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, portrayed by Edward Norton. And to be quite honest with you, I have some thoughts. Bruce Banner is fine in this movie. Like, he's cool. Overall, as someone who's seen a bunch of Edward Norton films, this is Edward Norton on autopilot, in my opinion. Ruffalo is indeed my favorite actor of the three actors that have played Hulk. And honestly, aesthetically, however, Norton fits in this movie. He resembles that of a Bruce Banner I had in my head before the MCU. Someone a bit skinny, somewhat of a wise ass, but still very recluse into themselves, etc., etc. Maybe a little heroic, but just, quiet and understated overall. And that's pretty much what he is. He does a bunch of cool and gross shit in this movie, like swallowing a USB drive when he's getting hunted down, or super gluing a cut shut to prevent his gamma blood from infecting a batch of soda. He does a bunch of nifty things that we really don't see in modern MCU films, or just films in general, that just help build the character in that way. Unfortunately, those are the only real indications of building his character. Everything else is either Edward Norton staring at things longingly or intensely, like he's studying something, and that's pretty much it. I think maybe a more characterized portrayal of Banner with some exaggerated tendencies could have elevated the character as well as his unique identity amongst the Avengers if Edward Norton continued with the franchise. And to be honest with you, I really feel bad for him because he's got two baddies in this universe who really don't care if that green baby arm tear him in half.
Good night. Good night.
Like, damn, bitch, relax. Spray her with some water. When it comes to Hulk, Hulk himself is probably at his most angry and violent in this movie and compared to the rest of the MCU. And a lot of people, like I said, shit on Ruffalo's Hulk, but let's be clear, he really isn't that strong in this movie. A lot of people like to say, if this Hulk faced Thanos, oh man, Thanos would have had a problem. No, he would have gotten dispatched way quicker. This dude was getting worked by sound fucking guns and a human at one point. He was legitimately struggling with a human. Okay, then on to the next, Thunderbolt Ross. And Ross's obsession with the Hulk is definitely portrayed with much more depth, considering his complications during conversations with Blonsky and his mutual obsession of the Hulk after he's introduced to the mission, as well as his daughter Betty's relationship with Bruce also complicating things. It's clear that this character is fighting maybe, you know, just this feeling of knowing what he's doing is pretty much wrong. He's just driven by this obsession for power, I guess you could say. Unfortunately, I don't think the film does a good enough job at really putting you in the mindset of Ross and seeing how conflicted he truly is. Then we get to Blonsky, and Blonsky's obsession with the Hulk is that of like a hunter and is also incredibly shallow. It was something that really could have been developed in a way that could have been interesting. Abomination, much like Ironmonger in Iron Man 1, is just an evil mirror of the protagonist, and that's cool, but then he's also the mirror of him visually in a way that makes the final fight scene completely a waste of time. I'm not gonna lie. I think if these characters had more of a relationship, like maybe if the film was presented more anachronistically, like he's been the one hunting Bruce for years with Ross, so his obsession can be, you know, a little bit more justified and developed as something of he's been chasing and looking for this guy and hunting his movements for 5 years. Thusly, when it's time to fight, it makes it a little bit more complicated and difficult for Hulk. But he did have that badass moment of fighting Hulk in an open field and getting kicked in the chest. Best part of the movie, by the way, not gonna lie. Then we get to Betty, and Betty's romance here with Bruce is portrayed way better than what it was in the original film, and I think Liv Tyler does a much better job than Jennifer Connelly did in the original Hulk film. However, Liv Tyler still isn't that great. A lot of her performance is just like this weird breathy tone that she has, even when she's screaming, and it gets kind of annoying.
Before they carted it all away.
But like I said, I do think the romance and relationship between her and Bruce is presented slightly better, considering they have much more time to quip and interact with each other. And you could definitely feel the love, because I'm not gonna lie, she completely drops Phil Dunphy to hug Tyler Durden in the pouring rain. And also is like, she a super soldier? Like, she keeping up with these vehicles. Like, what are we doing here? Ross, you got some explaining to do. And finally, out of all the main characters, we get to the last one, and his name is Samuel Stearns, aka Mr. Blue. He's been Bruce's contact in America that he's been communicating with through the dark web while he's been on the run. They meet like halfway through the movie, and he helps Bruce out, but it's clear that this dude is nuts, and it's also clear that unfortunately he's Bruce's only option at the time. I do think his reappearance in Brave New World would have been more impactful if he was maybe portrayed by a more prominent actor like Phil Dunphy's, or maybe, you know, somebody else, Ty Burrell, or another more energetic actor in that realm, maybe a bit more comedic, could have done a better job. When it comes to the context of this film in the MCU, as well as whether or not it's a follow-up to the 2003 film, it is really a mixed bag, I'm not gonna lie. The movie itself is a soft reboot, considering it starts with Bruce on the run, much like how the first film ended, but the intro and re-explanation of motivations are all new, thusly disconnecting it. I believe that it was originally developed as the sequel to that movie, and then it was repurposed into the MCU, which is, you know, it's perfectly fine. And to be honest with you, after rewatching this, Brave New World serves as pretty much an on-par sequel story. Both really aren't that great, and I do feel like are still very much overhated. I just feel like Brave New World is way more entertaining and has much more rewatchability, whereas with this film, I was kind of bored with it. If we get into the specifics of what I liked, I think the scene in which Stearns and Bruce are conducting their operation is more of what I wanted in terms of the tone and vibe, especially the creep factor factor of some of the visuals of, you know, just the pain of Bruce transforming into Hulk. Like I said, when I think about more of like the abstract stories, especially the ones that show you more of like a metaphorical physical transformation that Bruce goes through and how painful it could be, or how his psyche can be represented by a transformation that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality that the character's in, but just the psyche of it, I think could have been cool. There really isn't much of that outside of that scene. Ang Lee's Hulk actually, you know, has some of that. There are a couple of more psychedelic abstract scenes in that movie, and I think that's some of the better parts of that movie, and this movie is considerably lacking in that aspect. In fact, this movie is sauceless. You know, Ang Lee's movie isn't that great, but at least it had its ambitions to go somewhere and take things in a direction that could be visually appealing, and it has its own identity visually. There's none of that here. But much like early MCU, like Iron Man, Winter Soldier, Ant-Man, the sets and overall environments feel real and lived in, like the houses and buildings that they're in, as opposed to just, you know, random blue and green screen slop that we get these days. Outside of the mid-credit scene, also, there's really no shoehorning or connection to the rest of the MCU, which is appreciated, considering after seeing that Brave New World post-credit scene, I'm pretty much over post-credit scenes. I think I was over post-credit scenes after Doctor Strange 2, but you know, it's tradition at this point, I guess, right? There's also like an Easter egg to the original show in terms of them playing the music, like the ending song, I think once or twice, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't forced. It was just clearly more of an homage because the film doesn't stop for it. It just happens and it keeps going, so I appreciated it. And as mentioned before, Phil Dunphy's in it, and honestly, he has the best line of the whole movie.
I used to wonder why she never talked about you. Now I know.
And of course, the Falcon kick scene is just insanely brutal. Like, it's probably the most brutal part of the MCU. Like, I'm not even kidding. The animation in this is also not that good. A lot of people tell me like, oh man, what happened to the sauce of the MCU? Like, look at how good this looks. And then they'll use frames from this movie, and I do not understand that, like, at all. There are so many moments in this film where it looks like a PS3 cutscene in the worst ways possible. Like, not on some Last of Us shit. I'm talking about midway through the PlayStation 3's life cycle, like clearly a product of its time, because even Iron Man has some color, some vibrancy to it. Even Iron Man 2, Phase 2 kind of takes that back a little bit, but then reintroduces it with Guardians and a couple others. But man, Incredible Hulk stands out at just how visually drawn back it is in comparison to the rest. And you know, I understand that they were maybe trying to go for a different vibe visually, but unfortunately, because the special effects are lacking, this drab lack of color doesn't really help that out either. Like, seriously, dude, when people say that this Hulk looks better than Ruffalo's Hulk, I'm like, are you kidding? Look at the textures and the hair follicles on Ruffalo's Hulk versus this Hulk. This Hulk looks like a Final Fantasy boss or some shit like that. This does not look like a living, breathing creature in the real world, and we all know it. Well, look at this fucking gunship. Like, are you serious? I also think that this is a lifeless introduction movie. There are a handful of movies in the MCU, as well as other superhero movies out there, that instead of doing a straight up origin story where they show you how the character became the alter ego that they are, and then the stories progressed in the sequel, it just introduces the character as someone who's already established as whatever their alter ego is. And this is the first and an example in the direction of, I don't think Marvel is particularly good at that. Outside of Shang-Chi and Homecoming, I can't really remember any of the introduction but not origin movies are good. Like, I mean, when I think about it, this, Thor, Black Panther, Black Widow, and Eternals really aren't my cup of tea, and they all do that. So maybe it's just my own biases, but I'm not a big fan of it. The intro also shouldn't have been a montage. I think the intro being a montage, very similar to the intros of the Spider-Man Raimi movies and a couple other movies around this time period, is just not a look. It doesn't work, you know, especially with a movie like this that is predicated on the idea of only being entertaining during action scenes. Starting the film with an action scene like the one that's cut up and montaged and heavily edited could have given the film a huge punch of energy that it needed for the first act, in my opinion. They also have Banner dead to rights at the beginning. They're like, you know, during this beginning chase, and they just look at each other and then he just runs away. Like, it's really funny. And like I mentioned earlier, the movie ends with a generic CGI fight, and even though Iron Man kind of started this trope, I really can't attribute that film to have a negative reputation because of it. Considering how good 80% of that movie is, we could forgive it. Here, this film does not justify this type of ending at all. Like, I'm not gonna lie, obviously it was leading to it, but the fight itself, as well as everything leading up to it, isn't good enough for me to just be like, well, you know, they had to do it this way. It also has a scene that continues Hollywood's weird hate boner for comic book looks. Like, he gets purple pants and then it's like, oh, I don't like these, and she's like, well, it was the stretchiest. It's like, oh, that's so funny. Get it? He's not wearing pants like in the comics, but I mean, purple pants are iconic for Hulk, but him not having it in the movie is not something to nitpick about. In other comic book movies, maybe not having a accurate costume to the Hulk would have been a thing. Like, oh, the X-Men, they wear black, even though in the comics, you know, they're colorful sometimes, but even then they wear black sometimes. Hulk having pants that aren't purple, listen, if any nigga is upset about that, just shut up, dude. I'm not gonna lie, it's fucking pants. All right, he's still a green dude punching people. Who cares? And finally, my last big criticism is, man, that ain't Harlem, bro. Like, overall, this movie is a sauceless chase movie with some decent moments here and there, and does a decent but not good enough job of finding that sweet spot between following in Iron Man's footsteps but having its own identity, and then the other side, which is being a completely inoffensive comic book movie that the MCU did not need at this point. And when I mean inoffensive, I mean, as much as I shit on Catwoman, you know, Halle Berry's Catwoman, at least that has the memorability factor of being that dog shit. This movie just feels completely safe and just a product movie, not something that is indicative of it standing the test of time and it having its own identity in any way, visually, acting, plot wise. Nothing about this movie feels original or feels important to the rest of the MCU up until Brave New World, and even then you could just watch Brave New World and pretty much be jiggy with everything that's going on, because I didn't remember this movie and I still enjoyed Brave New World like a smidge over this, because the story itself, the vibrancy of the visuals and things of that nature just felt better. The characters had more charisma. I liked majority of the characters in that film, whereas here I don't care about pretty much anybody. I may make a video about Brave New World, but I don't know. But outside of that, what do you guys think? I know a ton of people love this movie. Why do you disagree with me if you love this movie? Or if you agree with me, why do you agree with me? Maybe we have different reasons as to why we both really don't enjoy this movie that much. If you're interested in my letterbox of other movies I've seen and rated this year, just to, you know, randomly see my opinion, much like my social medias, those will all be in the description down below. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I will see you either in the next video or the next Retro Redux video. Bye bye.